Just get that Pelican case over to the C5, ma'am. The loadmaster's waiting, and we don't have all day for civilian contractors to be sightseeing on the flight line. The crowd of young airmen, already tense under the oppressive desert sun, snickered. Master Sergeant Frank Miller, a man whose voice was perpetually calibrated to a volume just shy of a jet engine, gestured with a dismissive wave of his hand. His face, tanned and creased from 20 years of barking orders under this same unforgiving sky, was a mask of pure, unadulterated condescension. He looked at the woman before him, taking in the simple gray polo shirt, the practical khaki pants, and the way her dark hair was pulled back into a simple, severe knot. She was of average height, with a wiry frame that he mistook for frailty, and her face was devoid of makeup, showing only the faint lines of concentration around eyes that seemed to be taking in everything at once. She looked, to his experienced but deeply prejudiced eyes, like a mid-level logistics coordinator from a civilian firm, probably lost and definitely in his way. The woman's gaze remained steady, her expression unreadable. She offered no protest, no explanation, no flash of anger or indignation. She simply gave a short, almost imperceptible nod. But it was what she did next, or rather, what she didn't do, that began the first subtle unraveling of his assumptions. She didn't look at the heavy, reinforced equipment case with dread or uncertainty. She didn't ask for help. Instead, her eyes briefly scanned the case, then the dolly cart next to it, and finally the C5 Galaxy that squatted on the tarmac like a metal behemoth, its cavernous maw open and waiting. Her movements were economical, precise. She checked the dolly's wheel locks with the toe of her sensible shoe, then gripped the Pelican case not with a clumsy heave, but with a practiced, ergonomic motion that spoke of long familiarity with leverage and weight distribution. As she began to wheel the heavy container toward the aircraft, a figure watching from the shaded doorway of the operations building shifted slightly. General Wallace Thorne, the four-star commander of the entire Air Mobility Command, had flown in unannounced for a preliminary walkthrough before the formal inspection. He saw the woman. He saw Miller's casual humiliation of her, and he saw the ripple of amusement through the junior ranks. But when the general saw her stance, the way she instinctively angled the heavy cart to account for the slight grade of the tarmac, the way her head remained on a swivel, constantly scanning the active flight line for vehicle and aircraft movement, a lifetime of situational awareness compressed into a single, fluid action, a flicker of something other than curiosity crossed his face. It was a look of dawning, almost impossible recognition. If you believe that true authority is worn not on the sleeve, but in the soul, type competence below. Master Sergeant Miller, satisfied with his reassertion of control over his small corner of the universe, turned his attention back to the frantic preparations for the upcoming Inspector General visit. The IG inspection was the great sword of Damocles that hung over every command, a week-long ordeal of microscopic scrutiny where careers could be made or broken on the basis of a misplaced tool or a misfiled report. For Miller, it was his magnum opus, the culmination of a career built on process, regulation, and the unwavering belief that volume was a substitute for leadership. He stalked the flight line like a territorial predator, his voice a constant, grating presence that corrected, berated, and bullied his subordinates into a state of terrified efficiency. He saw the world in black and white, in regulations followed and regulations broken, in people who belonged and people who didn't. The woman in the gray polo shirt was, to him, a disruption, a piece of chaos in his carefully ordered world. He watched her for a moment longer as she maneuvered the dolly up the steep ramp of the C5, her movements steady and sure-footed. He felt a brief, irritating prickle of something he couldn't name. It wasn't respect, not yet, but it was an anomaly. Civilians were usually clumsy on a flight line, intimidated by the scale and the noise. They moved with hesitation. This woman moved with purpose. He dismissed it as a fluke, a small deviation in his otherwise perfect predictive model of human incompetence. He was a man who trusted his gut, and his gut told him she was a nobody. His assumptions were the bedrock of his reality, a carefully constructed fortress of experience that had protected him for 2 decades. He assumed her quietness was timidity. He assumed her simple clothes were a sign of a low-level station. He assumed her gender and unassuming physical build were indicators of weakness. These assumptions were not just thoughts. They were operational certainties, as real to him as the thrust-to-weight ratio of an F-16. He turned to a young airman first class who was nervously checking a manifest on a tablet. "Peterson," Miller barked, making the young man jump. "You see that? That's what happens when we let contractors wander around unescorted. They slow things down. They get in the way. Remember that. This is a professional military installation, not a corporate park. Efficiency, precision, control. Those are the words we live by." He was preaching now, his voice carrying across the tarmac, intended not just for Peterson, but for everyone within earshot, a public lesson using the anonymous woman as his unwilling teaching aid. The airmen nodded, their faces grimly compliant, their silence a testament to Miller's suffocating brand of authority. They were too young, too inexperienced, to see the cracks in his certainty. They only saw the rank on his collar and the volume of his voice. They saw a man in charge, and they saw a woman being put in her place. What none of them, least of all Miller, understood was that they were witnessing a profound and dramatic irony. They were watching a master of the art of war being told how to move a box by a man who had only ever read the instruction manual. The silence of the woman was not born of meekness. It was the silence of observation, the calm patience of a predator that knows its moment will come, not through a show of force, but through an undeniable demonstration of reality. She was a professional in a world of amateurs, and the stage was slowly, inexorably, being set for the performance of a lifetime. The crisis, when it came, did not arrive with the thunder of an explosion or the shriek of an alarm. It began, as most modern disasters do, with a flicker of light and a line of red text on a computer screen. Deep within the base's multi-million-dollar command and control simulation center, the final readiness drill before the IG inspection was underway. This was Miller's pride and joy, a high-fidelity simulator that could replicate any tactical scenario, from a regional skirmish to a full-scale global conflict. On the main screen, a holographic map of the world glowed with the complex dance of strategic assets, satellite uplinks, naval carrier groups, and wings of stealth bombers, all represented by intricate, pulsing icons. Miller stood at a central podium, directing the scenario with the bombastic flair of a film director, his voice booming through the headset system. "Red Air is testing our eastern flank. I want the 3rd Fighter Wing to establish a CAP over Sector Gamma. Now, people, now. The IG will be testing our response times to the nanosecond." Suddenly, a critical data feed from the Aegis Network simulator, the system that managed all Allied naval and air defense assets, flatlined. A single, ominous message appeared on the screen. "Cascade failure. QLDS link severed quantum link data stream." The digital backbone of the entire simulation. A collective gasp went through the room of 24 highly trained operators. Icons on the main map began to blink red and then vanish. The entire eastern seaboard of the simulated United States went dark. "What is that? Get it back online," Miller roared, his face flushing a dangerous shade of crimson. "Tech support. Give me tech support now." A young lieutenant, his face pale, frantically worked a keyboard. "Sir, it's not a software issue. The system is reporting a catastrophic hardware disconnect at the primary node. We've lost the whole network. It's a dead stick. We'd have to reboot the entire system. It would take 6 hours, maybe more. The drill is a total loss." The air in the room became thick with the metallic taste of failure. 6 hours. The IG team was arriving in 3. This wasn't just a glitch. It was a public, verifiable, career-ending disaster, and it was happening in Master Sergeant Miller's house. He slammed his fist on the console. "Unacceptable. There has to be a manual override, a bypass, something." He began shouting contradictory orders, his carefully constructed facade of control shattering into panicked bluster. It was in this moment of rising chaos that the woman in the gray polo shirt, who had finished her task on the flight line and had been observing the simulation from the back of the room at the quiet invitation of General Thorne's aide, stepped forward. She moved through the panicked technicians with the same calm, unhurried grace she had displayed on the tarmac. She didn't speak a word. She simply reached the main console, her eyes scanning the error logs scrolling rapidly down the screen. Miller, seeing her, finally erupted. "Who in the hell are you? I told you to stay off the flight line, not to wander into my C2 center. Security, get this civilian out of here now." But no one moved. They were all transfixed by the woman. She ignored Miller completely, her focus absolute. Her hands, which he had dismissed as delicate, moved with a surgeon's precision. She bypassed the standard user interface, her fingers flying across the keyboard, typing in lines of command line code that none of the trained technicians recognized. The system, which was designed to be user-friendly, was locked down tight against such deep-level access. But she moved through the firewalls as if they weren't there. "I said get her out," Miller bellowed, taking a step toward her. Before he could reach her, a calm, authoritative voice cut through the room like a razor. "Master Sergeant, stand down." General Thorne had entered the room, his aide at his side. He stood near the doorway, his arms crossed, his expression unreadable but his command absolute. Miller froze, his mouth agape, snapping to a rigid brace. The entire room fell into a deafening silence, broken only by the soft clicking of the keyboard under the woman's fingers. She didn't even seem to notice the general's arrival. She had found what she was looking for. A single line in the diagnostic code referred to a legacy system, a piece of hardware from the early 2000s that had been integrated poorly into the modern network. It was a known vulnerability, but one that was supposed to be protected by 3 layers of software patches. She turned from the console and walked to a nondescript maintenance panel on the wall, the one marked "Do Not Open." Authorized personnel only. With a multi-tool that she produced from her pocket, she unfastened the 4 security bolts in less than 10 seconds. Inside was a tangled nest of fiber optic cables and circuit boards. Miller and his technicians stared dumbfounded. No one had opened that panel in a decade. The woman's fingers traced the glowing cables, her eyes narrowed in concentration. She found a single, hair-thin strand of glass fiber that was emitting a faint, almost imperceptible reddish light instead of the standard blue. A microfracture, a 1 in a million hardware failure. She didn't hesitate. She rerouted a redundant cable, splicing it into the main junction with a small en-bloc clip from her tool. The procedure was complex, something that would normally require a team of specialized engineers and a full system shutdown. She completed it in 90 seconds. She closed the panel, secured the bolts, and walked back to the main console. She typed one final command, execute_recovery_protocol_7. On the main screen, the terrifying red error message vanished. The system blinked, and then, one by one, the icons began to reappear. The eastern seaboard lit up green. The Aegis network was back online. The entire simulation was restored, stable, and fully functional. The cascade failure was averted. A collective, staggered breath was drawn by everyone in the room. The woman simply took a step back from the console, her work done. She wiped a smudge of dust from her hands on her khaki pants. In the stunned silence, Miller could only stammer, his arrogance completely vaporized, replaced by a profound and terrifying confusion. How? How did you do that? That's not possible. General Thorne finally moved from the doorway, his footsteps echoing in the cavernous, silent room. He didn't look at the restored map on the screen or the dumbfounded technicians. His eyes were fixed solely on the woman, and for the first time, his stern, weathered face broke into a small, almost imperceptible smile of immense pride and respect. He walked past the still frozen Master Sergeant Miller, stopping directly in front of her. The entire room held its breath, the tension so thick it felt like a physical pressure. They were expecting the general to demand an explanation, to question the civilian who had just performed a technical miracle that had saved the base from catastrophic embarrassment. They expected an interrogation. They were wrong. General Thorne, a man who commanded armies and advised presidents, a man who hadn't saluted a junior officer in 20 years unless in formal ceremony, slowly and deliberately raised his right hand to his brow. He executed the sharpest, most respectful salute of his long and storied career. The snap of his hand meeting the brim of his cover was like a gunshot in the silent room. "Colonel Reed," he said, his voice quiet but carrying the weight of absolute authority. "My apologies for the reception. I see you've arrived a day early. Welcome to Vandenberg." The word colonel hung in the air, a grenade of pure shock that detonated in the mind of every person present, most of all Master Sergeant Miller. His face, which had been pale with confusion, now turned ashen with a horrifying, dawning realization of his mistake. "Colonel?" This quiet, unassuming woman was a colonel? It didn't compute. It couldn't be right. Thorne, seeing the utter disbelief on every face, turned to his aide. "Major, please bring up Colonel Evelyn Reed's personnel file. Put it on the main screen for everyone to see." The major, who had known all along, nodded crisply and typed a command into his tablet. The holographic world map on the main screen dissolved, replaced by a pristine, official military service record. At the top, in bold letters, was the name Reed, Evelyn M. Below it, a photograph of the same woman, but this time she was in a flight suit, a helmet under her arm, an F-22 Raptor gleaming in the background. Her face in the photo was the same, calm, focused, professional. And then came the list of her accomplishments, a cascade of unbelievable credentials that scrolled down the screen, each line a hammer blow to the foundation of Miller's world. The narrator's voice began to read the file aloud, a litany of excellence that silenced all doubt. Unit designation, classified, formerly attached to the 7th Special Operations Wing. A murmur went through the room. Special Ops. Flight hours, 4,258. Over 2,000 in active combat zones. The pilots in the room exchanged looks of pure awe. That was more combat time than their entire squadron combined. Primary aircraft, F-22 Raptor, F-35 Lightning II, B-2 Spirit. She was qualified on the 3 most advanced and secretive aircraft in the inventory. A ghost. A legend. Educational background. Bachelor of Science in Aerospace Engineering, United States Air Force Academy. Master of Science in Computer Science, Massachusetts Institute of Technology. The technicians who had stood by helplessly while their system crashed now looked at their own hands in shame. She hadn't just fixed the machine. She had probably helped design the core principles it was based on. Notable awards. The Distinguished Flying Cross with Valor for Actions over Hostile Territory. The Bronze Star. The Air Medal with 6 oak leaf clusters. Each medal represented a moment of extreme bravery, a life-or-death decision made correctly under unimaginable pressure. The list went on, a seemingly endless scroll of specialized training schools, command positions, and mission classifications that were mostly just blacked-out blocks of text labeled Top Secret/SI. Finally, the major scrolled to the bottom, to her current assignment orders. The words burned into Master Sergeant Miller's retinas. Effective 0800 tomorrow. Colonel Evelyn M. Reed assumes command, 30th Space Wing, Vandenberg Air Force Base. She wasn't a contractor. She wasn't lost. She wasn't a civilian. She was her new boss, the incoming installation commander. The woman he had ordered to haul equipment like a day laborer was the officer to whom every single person on that base, including General Thorne himself, while on her installation, would now answer. General Thorne lowered his salute and addressed the stunned room. "Master Sergeant Miller," he began, his voice dangerously calm. "You are a man who prides himself on regulations and professional standards. Let me teach you the most important one. You never, ever judge a warrior by the cloth they wear, but by the competence they display. You assumed weakness where there was strength. You assumed ignorance where there was genius. Your assumptions, Master Sergeant, are a threat to this command and to the mission. You saw a woman in civilian clothes. I saw one of the finest command pilots and strategic thinkers this Air Force has ever produced. You owe Colonel Reed not just an apology, but your professional re-education, Miller could not speak. He could only stand there, a monument to his own shattered arrogance. The laughter of his airmen now a mocking echo in his memory. Colonel Reed, for her part, simply looked at General Thorne and gave that same, short, economical nod. "Thank you, General," she said, her voice the first full sentence she had spoken since arriving. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I'd like to review the diagnostic logs from the simulation. There appears to be a systemic vulnerability in the network architecture that needs to be addressed before the inspection." She turned back to the console, her focus already on the next problem, the past already forgotten. The lesson was over. The new era had begun. The story of what happened in the C2 Simulation Center did not just spread, it detonated. It moved through the base's information ecosystem with the speed and force of a shockwave, traveling from the stunned operators in the room to the maintenance crews on the flight line, from the pilots in the ready rooms to the clerks in the administrative buildings, from the chow hall gossip circles to the encrypted forums where military personnel shared unofficial news. Within hours, every soul on Vandenberg Air Force Base knew the name Colonel Evelyn Reed. The narrative grew with each retelling, acquiring the burnished patina of legend. They said she hadn't used a keyboard, but had interfaced with the machine directly. They said she had rewritten the core code in Aramaic. They said she had diagnosed the problem from the smell of ozone in the air. The apocryphal details didn't matter. The core truth was undeniable and far more powerful. The quiet woman in the gray polo shirt, the one Master Sergeant Miller had tried to humiliate, was a giant. She was Wraith, the call sign whispered with reverence by fighter pilots. A pilot so skilled she had allegedly flown a mission deep in enemy territory with her avionics completely disabled, navigating by the stars. She was the MIT genius who had authored the foundational white paper on network-centric warfare that was now required reading at the Air War College. She was the new commander. The base, which had been humming with the low-grade, anxious energy of an impending inspection, was now buzzing with a different kind of electricity altogether. A mixture of awe, excitement, and for a certain master sergeant, profound dread. The ripple effects were immediate and transformative. The casual, reflexive condescension that had been a part of the base's deep culture began to evaporate overnight. Airmen started looking at each other differently, wondering what hidden skills and untold stories lay behind the uniforms of their peers. The act of judging by appearance had been so thoroughly and publicly discredited that it became a source of institutional shame. Assumptions became the enemy. Competence became the only currency that mattered. Master Sergeant Miller's humbling was total and absolute. The following morning, at 0700 sharp, he stood waiting outside the base commander's office. He had not slept. He had spent the night replaying his own words, his own smug, dismissive gestures, each memory a fresh wave of mortification. He had spent a career building a reputation for being hard, but fair, for being a guardian of standards. And one afternoon, he had revealed himself to be a prejudiced fool. When Colonel Reed arrived, not in a flight suit or dress blues, but in the same simple, practical civilian attire as the day before, he snapped to attention and rendered a salute so rigid it looked painful. "Colonel Reed," he said, his voice hoarse, stripped of all its former bluster. Master Sergeant Miller reporting as ordered. "Ma'am, I have no excuse for my conduct yesterday. My actions were unprofessional, disrespectful, and a disgrace to the uniform I wear. I offer my deepest, most sincere apology." Colonel Reed stopped and looked at him. Her gaze was not angry, nor was it triumphant. It was analytical, the way an engineer looks at a faulty component to see if it can be repaired or if it must be replaced. She let the silence stretch, forcing him to stand in the uncomfortable space of his own failure. When she finally spoke, her words were not what he expected. There was no lecture, no "I told you so," no comforting absolution. "Your apology is noted, Master Sergeant," she said, her tone level and professional. "But apologies don't fix systemic issues. Your behavior yesterday was a symptom of a flawed culture, one that prioritizes appearance over ability. You have 20 years of experience on this base. You know the people and the processes better than anyone. Your punishment will not be a letter in your file. Your punishment will be to help me fix it. She gestured for him to follow her into her new office. You will lead a base-wide series of professional development seminars. The topic, she said, pausing as she sat behind her still empty desk, will be cognitive bias in leadership. You will use your own spectacular failure yesterday as the primary case study. You will stand in front of every airman at Vandenberg, and you will tell them, in your own words, how your assumptions nearly cost this base its operational readiness. You will be the living embodiment of the lesson we all need to learn. Are those orders clear, Master Sergeant? Miller could only nod, a profound sense of both dread and a strange, unfamiliar flicker of respect dawning within him. She wasn't destroying his career. She was giving him a chance to rebuild it on a foundation of genuine humility. Her leadership was as precise and effective as her technical skills. Meanwhile, the legend continued to solidify. In the C2 Center, someone printed out a grainy security camera still of Colonel Reed at the console, her face illuminated by the glow of the screen. They pinned it to the main bulletin board. Underneath, someone else had taped a small, hand-lettered sign that read, "The Standard." It became a touchstone, a reminder. The physical location of the repaired fiber optic node inside the maintenance panel was unofficially nicknamed the Reed Splice, a piece of folklore passed down from one generation of technicians to the next. The story became a part of the institution's DNA, a cautionary tale told to every new arrival at Vandenberg, a powerful lesson in the quiet, undeniable authority of demonstrated competence. The triumph was not just hers. It was a victory for a principle that she embodied, a principle that was now being woven into the very fabric of the command. Months later, the transformation of Vandenberg Air Force Base was palpable. The frantic, performative energy that had once defined it had been replaced by a quiet, focused professionalism. Colonel Reed's leadership style was a revelation. She held no bombastic commander's calls, wrote no lengthy, self-congratulatory emails, and sought no public accolades. Her command was a continuous, rolling demonstration of competence. She was as likely to be found under the fuselage of an F-35 with a maintenance crew, her hands covered in hydraulic fluid as she discussed a recurring issue with a landing gear actuator, as she was to be found in her office. She would spend hours with the young cyber warfare officers, not lecturing them, but listening, her deep knowledge of computer science allowing her to engage with their challenges on a level no previous commander had ever been able to. She led by example, and the example was simple. Know your job, do it with excellence, and respect the expertise of those around you, regardless of their rank or appearance. The base passed its Inspector General visit not just with flying colors, but with a level of performance that the IG team called benchmark setting and a new model for institutional excellence. The culture of quiet competence that Reed had instilled had produced results that were loud and clear. Master Sergeant Miller, for his part, became an unlikely evangelist for the new philosophy. His mandatory seminars on cognitive bias became legendary. He stood before crowded auditoriums, stripped of his former arrogance, and recounted the story of his own public humiliation with brutal, unflinching honesty. He used his own prejudice as a scalpel to dissect the dangers of assumption. He was a changed man, humbled but not broken. He had been given a second chance not to reclaim his old authority, but to earn a new kind of respect, one rooted in vulnerability and a hard-won wisdom. He became a more effective leader in his final year of service than he had been in the previous 19 combined, mentoring young NCOs on the critical difference between shouting and leading. The bulletin board in the C2 Center still bore the photo of Colonel Reed, now framed and protected behind glass. The Standard had become the base's unofficial motto. It was a constant, silent reminder that the highest rank belongs to the person who can solve the problem, that true power requires no announcement, and that respect is a debt paid to ability, not to a name tag or uniform. The legacy of that single afternoon was not just a story. It was a fundamental shift in the operational reality of the installation. It was a lesson that had been burned into the collective consciousness of the command. The most dangerous person in the room is often the one you notice least, and the loudest voice is rarely the most important. The true impact of Colonel Reed's leadership, however, was measured not in inspection scores or efficiency reports, but in the futures of the men and women she led. A young female airman, a gifted mechanic who had been repeatedly overlooked for promotion because of her quiet, introverted nature, was personally selected by Reed to lead a critical diagnostic team, where her meticulous, methodical skills flourished, setting her on a path to becoming a chief engineer. A junior lieutenant with a radical idea for drone deployment, an idea that had been dismissed as too theoretical by previous commanders, was given a small budget and the colonel's full support to develop a prototype. His system would go on to revolutionize reconnaissance tactics for the entire Air Force. By consistently rewarding quiet competence over loud confidence, Reed cultivated a garden of innovation and excellence. Her legacy wasn't a singular event. It was the countless careers she nurtured, the potential she unlocked simply by creating an environment where results spoke louder than rhetoric. Years after she had moved on to even higher command, the story of her first day at Vandenberg was still the first thing new arrivals learned. It was no longer just a cautionary tale about a master sergeant's mistake. It had become the base's founding myth. It was a parable used to teach the core tenet of the Vandenberg way. Look for the quiet professional. Listen to the person who is observing, not the one who is shouting. Trust the evidence of your eyes, not the prejudice of your ears. The real uniform is skill. The real rank is mastery. Legacy is not a monument you build to yourself. It is not your name carved in stone or your portrait hung on a wall. True legacy is the culture that continues after you're gone. It is the standard that is upheld in your absence. It is the lesson that is passed from one generation to the next, a living principle that breathes in the actions of those you inspired. Colonel Evelyn Reed never sought to become a legend. She simply sought to do her job with quiet, unwavering excellence. But in doing so, she taught an entire institution that the calm, steady hand is always more powerful than the clenched fist, and that the most profound authority comes not from the noise you make, but from the silence you command when you demonstrate, beyond all doubt, who you are. For more stories where quiet competence triumphs over loud arrogance, and where a professional's skill defines their worth, subscribe to Unknown Heroine Stories.